Well, really glad to be here as you guys are walking through. And I should ask you this. I'm a Habakkuk guy. Are you Habakkuk? All right. So there is a Habakkuk class of people, which I'm not one of. Has anybody raised Habakkuk hearing that in church? Put your hands down. You're no longer welcome here. Sorry. So it is funny. I did realize that it was the last time I was here was the costume party. And you may think I wasn't in costume. Or did you think maybe I'm a cop and I'm just undercover and I couldn't tell you that because I'm get it? Because of regular clothes, cops, stop it. That's so stupid. That was stupid. I literally felt bad not wearing a costume, and then I saw my son's little sheriff badge on the way out. I'm like, perfect, I'm an undercover cop. Street clothes. All right. So we are walking through Habakkuk, not Habakkuk. It is, I hope you get to that place to really experience like God's word being living and active. And we're going to walk through passages, and that's great, but to really experience like God speak to you through his word. I mean, this book, we're talking, 28, almost 3,000 years ago this was written. Even just studying this passage again, it is unbelievably relevant to your life. I mean, this is over 3,000 years ago this was written, and I'm studying it, and God is ministering to me. So I hope you get to that place where you can hear God speaking to you. And just to give another plug for baptism, like one of the things I love about ministry like this, I mean, to get out on your own from under your parents' home. You know, I did youth ministry for a while, did middle school ministry, which was always fun. Anytime I told people I did middle school ministry, 90% of the time the response I would get is, why? Why would you do that? Because it was a crazy time, but it was influential and fun, and it was exciting. But what I love about your phase is when people in middle school say they're Christian, it's really hard to know, is that their parents' faith or is it really theirs? And so for you to get in that place, man, you're kind of spreading your wings to really decide, okay, this faith is my own. I'm not a Christian just because I was raised in a Christian home. I'm a Christian because I met Jesus and I'm giving my life to him. And so I'll say this at the baptism meeting, and I'll say it to you now. If you're even toiling at all, should I get baptized? You're asking the wrong question. Don't ask, oh, I wonder if I should get baptized yet. Ask, am I a Christian? Have I given my life to him? If you answered that one, you've answered the next one. Baptism isn't just something, oh, that's a nice step to help me grow. It is the symbol, it is the picture that everybody gives that you indeed have made that decision. So if you answer yes to that first question, man, I know I was raised in a Christian home, maybe I was raised going to youth groups, but this is real to me. This isn't just, oh, this is fun and I get to crab walk and dress up like a sad hot dog with no relish. There's more to it than that. When you get to that place, no, this is real to me, then dive in and take that step. If you're a Christian, then you should get baptized. I don't care if you do it here or do it somewhere else, but it's not this kind of optional thing. So, quick plug for that. Now dive back into Habakkuk. Part of, especially, I mean, when you study God's word, we love kind of the stories of Jesus. We love maybe even the letters. They seem easier to grasp, but this book is so unbelievably practical. When we wrestle through the big things of life, and so this is week 2, right? So we're into week 2, and if you were here last week, you know, when the prophet begins to ask these questions, like, God, are you listening at all? God, do you care at all what's happening in my life? Like, I've prayed about this, and it seems like you're not even listening. Now, maybe you're a Christian, maybe you're not, and if you've been a Christian for more than 2 days, you've had that feeling. You know, I, as a pastor for like 15 years now, wrestle with this all the time. You get to that place. Maybe you've gone through something tough. Like, have you ever been in that place and really wondering, God, are you even hearing me? Like, God, what is the deal? If you were listening, if you cared about me at all, you would have done something. And that is kind of his first lament, is he's just railing at God. God, why don't you care what's happening in my life? Why don't you care what's happening in this world? If you've ever wondered that, if God really hears you, does God really care what's going on in the world? Does God care what's happening in your life? Then this is unbelievably practical. So he cries out to God, and then God responds. You think I'm not going to do anything? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise up Babylon, and they're going to overtake everybody. And of course, we pick up after that like, whoa, hey, God, could we maybe get a new plan? Did you ever, you feel like God's not doing anything, and then when God does something, you're like, whoa, time out, God, that's not really what I had in mind. I mean, one of the classic kind of prayers to never pray is like, God, teach me patience. And then he answers that prayer in a way you would never want. You pray that prayer, I want to grow closer to you, God. And then your boyfriend or your girlfriend dumps you, you get sick, you lose your job, and you're like, God, that's not what I had in mind. Like, you ever experience that when you ask God to do something and he seemingly does something, and you're like, whoa. That is not at all what I had in mind. And that's kind of where we pick up the lament. Habakkuk says, God, you're not doing anything. God says, no, I'm going to do something. I'm going to raise up Babylon, and they're going to overtake you. And Habakkuk says, whoa. I mean, in some ways, it's hard to fathom how shocking that would have been. I mean, Babylon, anybody see the movie 300? Like, so Babylon, they're the guys just before. So the Persians overtake the Babylonians. I mean, it's a movie, but it's a little taste of how jacked up those guys were. Like, they were vicious, brutal, and God is going to use that messed up nation to overtake God's people. I mean, a legit equivalent is if we were praying, God, would you just move in our nation? God, I want to see revival in America. Man, it seems like nobody cares about you. And God says, okay, I'm going to answer your prayer. I'm going to have Russia drop a nuke on the U.S. I don't know, God, maybe new plan. Like, that's the equivalent of what happened. Can you imagine God saying, hey, I'm going to answer all your prayers for America. I'm going to have Russia drop a nuke on you guys. And so that's when we get into the place where it always cracks me up. You know, has a problem, and then God says, I'm going to have a solution. And then you're going to see his lament like, whoa, can we just go back to the problem? You ever see, I love those kind of drug pharmacy commercials. It's like a pill for allergies, and then they do the side effects. It's like, hey, it may help with allergies, may cause you to commit suicide. You will lose a limb. Your fate. I mean, the side effects are way worse than the problem. Like, I mean, it cracks me up whenever they'll say, hey, this is for that, and then list off 50 side effects, including death and all those other things. And it almost seems like, I feel like the side effects are worse than what I was dealing with. And that's where we find ourselves in Habakkuk. He's asking for God to move. God says, okay, I'll move. That brutal nation, they're going to overtake you. That's my plan. And then now we dive into what is Habakkuk's response. God reveals he's going to send like the equivalent of like ISIS of Russia to overtake God's people, and then he's going to respond to that. And this, of course, imagine hearing that. It's such a bitter pill to swallow. You ever heard that phrase? Man, that's a bitter pill to swallow. I don't know what's going on in your life, but is there something, what is the bitter pill you have to swallow right now of like, man, I don't want this in my life, but this is what God brought me, and somehow I got to take back this pill and swallow this bitter pill. That's right where Habakkuk is. So God reveals to Habakkuk, Babylonians are coming, and here is Habakkuk's response. Go to that slide. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? So this is Habakkuk talking about this brutal nation of the Babylonians. And listen how he describes him, and you again hear his lament. God, why are you going to idly sit by? Yes, we had issues here, and then you're going to send a nation, what does he say, far more wicked than us. You're going to send a wicked nation to judge a righteous nation. That doesn't make sense. You ever get that? If you haven't, you will. God says, I'm going to use all things in your life. You will come to a time when you're going to say, how can you use something so jacked up as this? If that isn't practical, then you haven't lived enough, because you will get to that place where something brutal is going to happen and God's going to use that. And you're going to say, how can you use something so messed up? That is not what I had in mind. So I got a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. And it kind of reminded me of this, because I think it's a bit of the equivalent of kind of what's going on here. My daughter, she's older. They'll get into some kind of fight. Anyway, who has siblings in here? Is everybody pretty much? All right. I don't think any only children here. But so my 9-year-old will come up. Dad, my brother's doing this. Can you punish him? And then maybe you've ever had this happen to your parent, and she gets so mad, like, he's doing this, and they're both screaming. I'm like, fine, both of you go to your room. You ever have your parents say that? You're like, and of course, what is her thing? It's not my fault. I'm not the one doing it. It's his fault. And she gets so indignant. That's kind of what's happening, right? Habakkuk is crying out, punish the Babylonians, and then God says, I'm going to have I'll judge them, but I'm going to have them overtake you. You both go to your room. And Habakkuk's like, what's the deal? We have some issues, but they're the messed up nation. Can you imagine if I told you that right today? You know what is God's answer to prayer in the world? Russia. You'd say, what? No way. To try to wrap your head around, man, is God using Russia for his purpose right now? It's hard to fathom, and that is what is going on. And he's saying, God, how can you do this? And he goes through how messed up they were. He's talking about how vulnerable they are. Like they feel like, you ever heard the phrase, shooting fish in a barrel? He's saying that's kind of how it feels. You've made mankind like fish in the sea, and they're just shooting us. They're going to come and just sweep us up like fish in a barrel. He talks about brings them all up with a hook in their nose. Like that's a fishing term, but there's actually like historical evidence that the Babylonians would do this. Like, they would just mercilessly slaughter people, but they wouldn't kill everybody. And how they would take them back to their nation is they would snap and pierce a hook through their nose, and they would just drag them along by the hook in their nose. Like when we think of today and like Geneva Convention and modern warfare rules, this was unbelievably brutal. Again, you can't fathom, and nor could Habakkuk, like, God, how can this be a part of your plan? You have to have wrestled with that in your life. God, how can this thing happen to me be a part of your plan? That's right where he's at. He said, these guys are the worst. They live in luxury. They worship their power. These guys are the worst, and you're saying they are your answer to prayer. I can't get my head around that. I said, I told you I've been a pastor for about 15 years now. So there's a lot of joys. It's fun. I get to come and give away Amazon gift cards to Ricky Bobby. Like, my job is fun. It's not all fun. It was one day. It was back to back. I did a funeral here and did a funeral down the other room, like 2 hours apart. This one was a suicide of a dad who had 3 or 4 kids, and I had to help walk that mom through. How do you tell a 7-year-old that their dad committed suicide? And then from there, I walked down the end of the building an hour later and had to do a funeral for a kid that died. Like, if you haven't felt it, you will. At some point, you're going to say, God, how in the world can you just sit by and watch this horrible stuff happen? In those days, those are bitter pills to swallow. Maybe you've had to swallow some bitter pills. I remember even back at 8 years old, it was like burned in my memory when my parents got divorced. I remember just my sister just crying. And I remember at 8 years old crying out to God, God, how can you allow this to happen? Maybe you've had to swallow a bitter pill already. Maybe you're in the midst of it. I don't know what's going on in your life. But you're staring at something and saying, God, this can't be a part of your plan. Do you hear me? Do you care? You're just going to sit and watch me walk through this. How do we swallow those bitter pills of life? And if you're not in the midst of it, you will be. At some point, and I hope it's not horrible for you, but we all face hard things. You're going to have to face a bitter pill you're going to have to swallow. And how do you get through that? I mean, this is horrendous. And this is God saying, I'm going to use this. So what do you do? What do you do when you're praying and crying out to God and God seems silent or ambivalent? He either can't hear me or he doesn't care. And that's his lament. He's just railing at God. God, how could you? So that's what I want to spend the rest of the time just looking at. How do we do it? How do we, all of us are going to have to swallow a bitter pill. How do we get through it? So he kind of sandwiches it. It's funny, my kids, they hate taking medicine. My daughter, when she does, like, you know, she has like this whole routine, like, all right, I need a glass of water. I need, you know, give me the medication. And then she pumps herself up, like, okay, you know, and then we have to like count down 3, 2, 1, and then she'll take it. And so she has to get herself all fired up. Like, that's a little bit what Habakkuk does. He's got to swallow this bitter pill. It's coming. God said, here's the plan. And he's trying to wrap his head around how God can use something so jacked up as a part of his plan. So first, how does he kind of pump himself up for it? Let's kind of go, this is the middle, so you'll see 13 to 17. But I kind of wanted to get right at the core of his lament, but that's not right where he started. So back it up. This is the verse before it. So kind of, man, I talked about, he has to swallow that bitter pill, but here's himself pumping himself up a little bit. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One, who shall not die? O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. You who are pure, you who are of pure eyes, than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. So there's tons of times I ask my kids to do stuff they hate. And it's punishment. I mean, you're not that far from being a kid. Your parents ever ask you to do something and it seems like messed up or you don't agree with it? Right? I mean, my kids don't always understand what needs to happen. And when something bad happens, in the end, I got to get to that place they will not understand. So just back up a little bit. You talk about medications. You know, I took my kids, you know, to get like their normal, like mumps, measles, vaccines. You can ask the doctors about the vaccines later, right? My kid, you would have thought I ripped his arm off. Like it was a shot. I mean, we had 4 nurses in there. I know, don't judge me. But it was the only way. I had him pinned to the ground, to the table. I had my shoulder into his stomach, holding his legs, and 3 nurses just to give him his normal shots. Like, little guy was like, why do you hate me? Like, I mean, am I doing that to torture him? Now, explain vaccines to a 2-year-old who doesn't talk yet. In that moment, look, he's not going to understand. I can't explain, a vaccine to him. In the end, I just got to pray, son, trust me. So that's where we got to get to the point, is in the end, you're going to walk through things. But where does he start? With the character of God. in the midst of it. I don't understand this. When you don't understand what's going on in your life, start with, I don't know what's going on here. So start with what you do know. Do you know who God is? He starts with God's character. God, my rock. I mean, that's my protector. I was reading a great psalm and talked about the rock that is higher than I. You think of like, the hurricanes go through flooding, right? What do you got to do in flooding? You got to get to high ground. And the Bible says God is that rock that's as high as you need to go. That rock that is higher than I, that none of your troubles can get to. Now, it doesn't feel that way in the midst of a hurricane, but God's saying, I can still be your protector. I am holy. So in the midst of whatever you're going through, okay, this is hard, but I still have to remember who God is. When you're struggling, go back to what I do know. Here's what I do know about God. I kind of liked it this way and put it this way. Go to that next slide. You have to decide, do your circumstances inform God's character, or does God's character inform your circumstances? So when you're facing that bitter pill, I don't like this. This is a horrible thing. Man, that must mean God doesn't really care about me. I'm going through this. God can't stop it. I guess God isn't powerful, right? Do you look at your circumstances? You're looking at that bitter pill, and that's how you determine who God is. Or, like Habakkuk, do you do the reverse? Say, okay, I don't understand for the life of me how this can be a part of your plan. I don't get why people in my life would die like that, why babies die. I don't get why people get sick like that. I don't get why, take your pick. God, this doesn't make sense. I don't know this, but I know who you are. Right? Do you view God through the lens of your problem, or do you reverse it? Do you allow God to inform your problem? Do you allow his character to inform your life, or is it reverse? And part of what Habakkuk is doing is I got to start with remembering who God is. Which one is it for you? Do your circumstances inform how you see God, or does how you see God inform how you come to your circumstances? And that's where Habakkuk starts. Okay, God, what you just told me is horrible, but I trust your character. I know who you are. I don't know how this works. Not Yoshi. I just had him to point right at Yoshi. I don't know how Yoshi works. In general, that tongue that flies out is crazy, right? Right? So I don't know how this thing in my life works, but I know who you are. When God says he is holy, listen, that means he is other. God's ways are above our ways. By definition of God's character, you will not always understand. If your goal is, God, tell me why this happened, make it all make sense, he's not going to get all the answers. God will reveal some. But if God is holy, that means he's other. That means he's above us. And it's not always going to make sense. But I'm going to trust in the goodness of God, who he is, above my circumstances. So you've got to start with, as you're facing to swallow those bitter pills of life, you got to remind yourself who God is. Because you're going to doubt that in the midst of hard things. So he reminds himself, all right, God, you are holy. You are my protector ultimately. I can't believe you're allowing this in my life. And then here's where he finishes. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. One part of what you learn, you got to start with who God is. But you need to learn to lament in your life. I was just at a conference. He said that was one of the biggest things that's going to provide spiritual growth in you. Do you know how to lament? So part of it is he rails at God. Do you feel comfortable saying to God what he just said? God gives us permission to say, God, I don't feel like you even care what's happening in my life. God, I feel utterly betrayed by you. If this happens, then that means I don't know if I can hold. He lets loose. You have to fire those arrows out at God, or else they're going to poison you. So you remind yourself who God is. You have to lament. If you're in a season right now where you feel like you're having to swallow a bitter pill right now, read the Psalms. Read one a day. Just read a psalm a day and listen how they lament. I don't care what your background is. Some churches, you couldn't dare question God. Didn't Jesus question God? Why, O Lord, have you forsaken me? He's questioning. The Bible gives us that permission. So I want you to learn how to lament. If not, you won't make it through. You won't be able to swallow that bitter pill. You'll choke on it, and it'll choke you out. You got to learn to be able to tell God how you're feeling, what you're struggling with. Be brutally honest. But then when you take it to him, you have to leave it there. I take my lament to God, and I leave it at the cross. I don't carry it around with me everywhere I go. When he talks about the watch posts and on the tower, again, you think of ancient cities, we don't have this, but you think of like massive walls that they would have surrounded cities, right? I'm sure there's movie images that can come to mind, where they would climb a massive watchtower. So part of what that is telling us, right, is how do you make it through this thing? You need to get above the weeds and get a little bigger perspective. Okay, this is horrible right now, but God, I know your ways are higher than my ways. Your plan is bigger than my plan. So you need to get to that place where it's not just about you. You need to climb higher and get a little perspective. But then you need to turn to him. What does he say? I will wait for your answer. You're struggling. Where are you turning to for resolution? You're struggling with something difficult, and whatever, I don't know where you're turning to. You're turning to Google to find answers to get you through whatever you're struggling with. That lament you have, your beef with God, are you taking it to God and saying, God, please help me with this? I'll close with a story. It was really powerful. This was recently. Maybe like a month ago, somebody came into my office. They were from just a great Christian home. Parents, wonderful, faithful. And they got to that point of having that crisis of faith. Like, I don't know that I can believe this anymore. I think it was getting to college and hearing like other professors challenging their faith. Like, I don't know, God, if you're real, how can all these other religions, how does this hold up? And got in a really dark place. And again, he was just doing all kind of research online. And got in a real bad spot. And finally, he scheduled an appointment with me. And then by the time we sat down, everything was changed. He did that. He got by his watch post. He climbed in the tower and cried out to God. Instead of burying all these doubts, he finally took them to God. God, I'm confused. I don't even know if you're real. What's going on? And just prayed and cried that out to God. And he goes, I don't know. And he just cries to God and says this, God, I don't even know if you're real. Help me. And he waits and listens for God. He takes his complaint to God and asks God to answer him. He's like, I need a Bible. So he goes into his parents' room. There's like a stack of Bibles in there. And he finds his mom's Bible at the bottom. And there's a bookmark in it. Opens it up. And it's like a study Bible. And the study Bible section is, are you struggling to believe if God is real? Dude was in a whole different spot. He cried out to God, and God met him in that moment. The exact thing he asked God, he finds an old Bible that wasn't been opened in years, and it's the exact thing he needed to hear, whatever you're struggling with. I can't explain it, but I know who God is. Remember God's character. Choose to allow God's character to inform what you're going through. And as you're going through, I want you to lament. I want you to cry out to God. Be brutally honest, and then go in that watchtower and wait. Okay, God, I need you to meet me in this. Let me pray. God, there are so many bitter pills to swallow. Unbelievably confusing. I don't know. I have no idea why you allow the things that you do. God, I know that you're good. But God, I don't know why you allow such evil, messed up things in this world. So God, help us to look to you and wait for you to speak to us in the midst of that. In Jesus' name, amen.